The October 13, 2016 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Zhang?
Here.
Mr. Pons?
Here.
Mayor Freiling?
Here.
Vice Mayor Foster? Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Just one note, Vice Mayor Foster is not with us today. He's currently on his honeymoon. We wish him a wonderful time, despite the hurricane. First item on the agenda today are the council minutes from September 6th and 8th, 2016, September 10th and 12th City Council retreats, and the September 13 Community GIO Workshop. Are there any edits?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move that the minutes be approved as presented.
Second.
Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Today we have two matters of special privilege. The first is the Excellence in Service to Williamsburg Award presented to Police Sergeant David J. And the second will be the presentation of the Mayor's Beautification Awards. Sergeant J, if you could join me at the podium, please. Please don't be intimidated by my size. The Excellence in Service to Williamsburg Award is special because it is peer recognition. It's the members of the city staff coming together and recognizing one of their own who's contributed greatly to the service to this community, to all of you. So we're very happy to award this. We have a resolution here that I will read. The City of Williamsburg takes pleasure in recognizing David M.J. for excellence in service to Williamsburg. Sergeant David J. has faithfully and honorably served the citizens of Williamsburg for 9 years, beginning as a patrol officer and subsequently promoted to sergeant in 2012. In addition to his primary duties, David has assumed the training officer role for the police department, a time and labor-intensive effort due to staff shift schedules and multiple training facilities. He maintains consistent communications with the Department of Criminal Justice Services and the Hampton Roads Academy of Criminal Justice to ensure that officers maintain all required certifications. He created an innovative staff training notification system, which documents training and attendance, instituted a new bi-monthly officer safety training program, and assisted in the development of a post-academy pre-field training program that ensures new police officers are thoroughly trained for independent patrol. Moreover, Sergeant J assists with the DMV grant requirements and facilitates numerous traffic safety checkpoints and selective enforcement schedules, all while attending the College of William and Mary, pursuing his master's degree in business administration. David J is an exemplary city employee who is vital to the success of the Williamsburg Police Department. He is hereby recognized for his dedication to excellence in keeping with the best tradition of public service in the city of Williamsburg, dated October 13, 2016, signed by myself as mayor and Mr. Collins as city manager. Sergeant.
Thank you.
In recognition of your excellence in service, we have a plaque for you and the actual signed resolution.
Great. Thank you very much.
Would you like to say a few words?
I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for their support, especially Chief Slogie for giving me the opportunity, selecting me to be a sergeant several years ago, and then all the other people I work with who've had my back and helping me get to where I am today. Thank you very much.
Today, we also have the pleasure of recognizing the recipients of the 2016 Mayor's Beautification Awards. This award program was developed and endorsed by the entire City Council as a means to recognize those who have enhanced the beauty of our community and aided in its environmental health. A beautification committee was appointed in February 2014 with the stated purpose of making recommendations to City Council on ways to improve the physical appearance of the city. I'd like to recognize and thank the members of the committee who've worked on the recognition program, who are all here today. Leslie Bowie, the chairwoman, Robert Grossman, and Hazel Braxton. Thank you very much. On behalf of the City of Williamsburg residents, Thanks for your efforts and commitment to the beautification of our community. This year, the awards being presented are in the categories of business, individual, institution, neighborhood, commercial new construction, residential renovation, and commercial renovation. We'll start with the business category. This year's winner is Team, Yankee Candle and Carrabba's Restaurant at 2200 and 2500 Richmond Road. It was noted that the beautiful combination of annual shrubs and trees displayed on both properties enhances Richmond Road, which is a major entrance corridor into the city. Presenting such an attractively landscaped site in a prominent location along a commercial corridor adds much to the city's efforts to create a welcoming and pleasant aesthetic for our visitors. Accepting the award today is Carrie Hill from Yankee Candle. Oh, yeah. This is much better, but thank you. The individual category winner are Mr. and Mrs. Randall Hawthorne at 106 Millneck Road. The nomination stated that the homeowner has installed extensive plantings and walls on steep slopes to prevent erosion. It is a wonderful example of an attractive landscape conservation project which not only enhances his property, but the Jamestown Road corridor. As the nomination alludes to, this project not only beautifies, but it also helps protect the precious ecology of Lake Matoka, which it gracefully overlooks. What Shelby and Randy have accomplished on their hillside of a yard is nothing short of amazing. The scale of the project must have been daunting, but it was planned and executed brilliantly. Accepting the award today are Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne. And Randy's a great runner. The winner for the institution category is another team, Williamsburg Area Transport Authority, or WADA, and the Holly Hills Garden Club for the bus shelter installation on Jamestown Road. The nomination noted that the combination of a shelter along with beautiful landscaping has provided a place where patrons can rest and be out of the elements while waiting for the next bus. Accepting the awards today are Cecile Glendenning of the Holly Hills Garden Club and WADA Executive Director Todd Tyree. Shy? It's lonely. Thank you.
Holly Hills Garden Club. Ron Grossman is on the committee, but
The nominations this year for the institution category were so strong that the committee decided to award a second winner. This award goes to the Williamsburg Garden Club for their continual maintenance and landscaping of the beautiful island on South Henry Street at Route 199. The nominee noted, "This garden club provides and maintains a lovely garden at the entrance to the city." Trust me, this is no small task, especially because of the proximity to 199. Every once in a while, it seems, a motorist misjudges the proper speed and angle for successful negotiation of the turn, resulting in a close-up view of the landscaping and more maintenance. Accepting the award today is Manoush Robinson from the Williamsburg Garden Club. The winner for the neighborhood category is the Yorkshire Homeowners Association for the enhancement of landscaping at the entrance to the neighborhood on Jamestown Road. The nomination noted that the complete redesign of plant material and trees at the entrance into the neighborhood has enhanced Jamestown Road for citizens, neighbors, and visitors entering the city. While maintaining an appealing aesthetic on a 4- and 5-lane street with no median can be a real challenge, and doing anything within an HOA adds its own special complexity. Thanks to the Yorkshire community for helping to keep Jamestown Road beautiful. Accepting the award today is Mary Ann Dallas with the Yorkshire Homeowners Association. Just make sure.
This was the young man who did the work.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
The next 3 categories were awarded by the committee based on recommendations from the city's Architectural Review Board. These categories are important because they really embody what's different about this awards presentation in many ways than the prior iteration. Because these recognize individuals who've invested in the built environment, whether new or historic. Previously, we really focused on landscaping, and the aesthetic of a community is a lot more than that. The winner for the commercial new construction category is G Square Incorporated for the Griffin Arms located at 515 Prince George Street. The nomination noted that the demolition of the buildings and construction of a new building that relates to the street has a positive effect, not only to the street, but to the vibrancy of downtown with new commercial uses with residential above. The coordination of the construction of the Griffin Arms with the city's streetscape improvements on Prince George also helped build a connection between Merchant Square and the commercial area closer to Zabel Stadium. The Granger family has had a long history with the city of Williamsburg and has made a lasting impact on this community. This is one more example of their many valuable contributions for which we are most grateful. Accepting the award today are former Mayor Gil Granger and his son Greg. Thank you. Amen. Just turn and get our picture taken. Appreciate it. The award for the residential renovation category goes to Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Mandrick at 321 North Henry Street. The nomination noted that the transformation of this residential dwelling along North Henry Street is a positive example of how the sensitive renovation of an older home that suffered from years of poor maintenance can make on the streetscape. The home was restored aesthetically both inside and out while maintaining much of the existing fabric. Well done. The Mandricks have taken a charming home and turned it into something special. Their care in the renovation work is so well done that a new observer wouldn't even know it has been done because the house fits so naturally into its environment. Accepting the award today are Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Mandrick. Thank you. The winner for the commercial renovation category is the Shops at 2nd Street, located at 301 2nd Street. The nominee noted the renovation of the existing building, along with new construction, has not only improved the property, but this entire important entrance corridor into the city. A representative is not able to attend the meeting today, but we thank Victor Minicello for his investments, which have helped revitalize this area and which has added to the overall beautification of 2nd Street. In addition to the award certificates presented today, a beautification award sign will be installed upon each winning property until August 2017. This prominent award sign recognizes outstanding contributions in the area of beautification and promotes continuing efforts. On behalf of my fellow members of City Council and the City of Williamsburg, we thank the award recipients for all they have done to make our community ever more special for our visitors, as well as adding to the quality of life of those who reside here. We very much appreciate all of your efforts. Thank you. This takes us to our public hearings. We have 3. The first is public comment on the goals, initiatives, and outcomes for the 2017-2018 biennium. Would you like to start us off, Mr. Collins?
This is just the public hearing at this point. The staff presentation would be later.
Okay. Anybody who'd like to speak regarding Council's goals, initiatives, and outcomes for the 2017-18 biennium, please come forward. State your name, address. Give it just one more moment. Okay. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. No, this is the goals, initiatives, and outcomes. Anything you'd like to mention at this point, sir?
I'll wait till the city manager agenda.
Okay, thank you. This will take us to our second public hearing, the proposed city charter amendment for the Williamsburg Regional Housing Authority Board of Commissioners membership, proposed ordinance 16-17.
Back in May, Mr. Mayor, City Council, and the Housing Authority agreed to an amended memorandum of agreement between the city and the Housing Authority, and part of that agreement was that the city would request a change to the city charter. This change in the city charter would expand the Housing Authority Board of Commissioners membership to 7, with City Council having the ability to serve as 5 members and Council appointing the other 2 members. That charter change is before you, along with one change that cleans up Section 22.6. It corrects a reference within the code section and removes some redundant language with this change that we're requesting. The public hearing is required prior to City Council submitting this to the General Assembly for its consideration, and so it's staff recommendation that City Council adopt proposed ordinance number 1617.
Are there any questions for Ms. Shelton?
Sir.
Okay, with that, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody wishing to comment on this, please come forward. Again, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Come back to council.
Obviously, it's pretty straightforward, I think.
Pretty straightforward to me.
I mean, we've talked about this before. It's something that's really necessary for us to do to comply with federal regulations. It's just so unusual to do one where we're not having to comply with the state regulations. A little change of pace. Do I hear a motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I move that City Council adopt proposed ordinance number 16-17 to amend the section 22.6 and sections 27 of the city charter.
Second.
Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Motion passes. This takes us to our third public hearing, Culinary Arts and Hospitality District. And we have 3 subsections under this. PCR 16-008, B4, Culinary Arts and Hospitality District text, proposed ordinance 16-14. PCR 16-009, Food Truck Regulations, proposed ordinance 16-15, and proposed ordinance 16-15A. And PCR number 16-010, B4, Culinary Arts and Hospitality District rezoning Capitol Landing Road from Colonial Parkway to Merrimack Trail, proposed ordinance 16-16. Ms. Murphy?
Mayor Freiling and members of City Council, The area of the city that encompasses the Northeast Triangle offers the opportunity to advance several priority policy issues identified in City Council's GIOs. Following the reallocation of capital improvement funds by City Council in February of 2016, the City Manager has worked with staff to review past planning efforts, the comprehensive plan, incentive plans, and zoning districts to establish an implementation plan for the Northeast Triangle, which is outlined in my memo. I will review the 3 cases which will create the B4 Culinary Arts and Hospitality District, detailed regulations for food trucks, and rezoning the commercial portion of Capitol Landing Road corridor from B2 to B4 as shown on this slide. The first case, PCR 16-0008, is to create the B4 Culinary Arts and Hospitality District. Included in my memo is the comprehensive plan's vision statement for the Northeast Triangle planning area. The statement of intent for the proposed B4 district states, this district is established to encourage the location of businesses related to the culinary arts along the Capitol Landing Road corridor between Colonial Parkway and Merrimack Trail. To this end, restaurants, brew pubs, microbreweries, microdistilleries, food trucks, and the like are allowed by right. To complement the culinary arts, hotels and other tourism-related uses are also allowed. The proposed B4 Culinary Arts and Hospitality District is a modification of existing B2 Corridor District. The proposed district regulations are narrowly drawn and are intended to encourage the location of businesses related to the culinary arts. To encourage new development and redevelopment in this area, restaurants, brew pubs, microbreweries, microdistilleries, and schools for the culinary arts are allowed by right. This will be the only district in the city where microbreweries, microdistilleries, brew pubs, and food trucks are allowed by right. Multifamily dwellings is the only residential use allowed with a special use permit in a mixed-use development which requires a gross floor area of 1/3 commercial to not more than 2/3 residential on a lot. The density allowed is the same as the B2, which is 14 dwelling units per net acre. Uses that are not compatible with the culinary arts have been removed, such as townhouses, automobile uses, contractor establishments, mini storage warehouses, and other uses as outlined in my memo. The second case, PCR 16-009, deals with food trucks. The B4 Culinary Arts and Hospitality District will be the city's first zoning district that allows food trucks on private property. Food trucks are currently allowed only in conjunction with the special events regulated by Chapter 9, Article 2 of the Williamsburg Code. Staff recommends that the operator of a food truck be required to own or operate a properly licensed restaurant in the city or be in partnership with the owner and or operator of a restaurant in the city, as evidenced by a fully executed partnership agreement. Some of the other major regulations for food trucks, which are detailed in Section 21-622, are food trucks can operate only on developed and occupied property and only during the hours when the business establishment on the premises is operating. Food trucks, unless otherwise approved, must be removed from the site when the on-business premises closes for the day. Food trucks must be parked at least 100 feet from any residential dwelling, and food trucks cannot be parked in or operated from a public street right-of-way. The last case is PCR 16-10, which is the rezoning from B2 to B4 for the Culinary Arts and Hospitality District. This case is the rezoning of approximately 76 acres from B2 Corridor Business District to B4 Culinary Arts and Hospitality District, as shown on this slide. The proposed B4 district food truck ordinance and rezoning from B2 to B4 for the commercial areas between the Colonial Parkway to Merrimack Trail along Capitol Landing Road will advance several priority policy issues identified in City Council's GIOs. The comprehensive plan's vision statement for the Northeast Triangle planning area recognizes that this is a diverse section of the city with both residential neighborhoods and commercial districts that offer opportunities for new development and redevelopment. Under the proposed changes, residential neighborhoods will remain residential and commercial areas along Capitol Landing Road will remain commercial. This area is ideally situated between I-64, the historic area, Busch Gardens, and Water Country for new development and redevelopment. It has the potential to attract more businesses that will grow the Williamsburg Tasting Trail, which is a new tourist initiative. Planning Commission held its public hearing on September the 14th, and one citizen spoke at the hearing. Planning Commission recommended City Council by a vote of 5-0 that the following cases be approved. For PCR 16-08, their recommendation is to amend the zoning ordinance to create the B4 Culinary Arts and Hospitality District as detailed in the attached ordinance 16-14. For case number 16-009, amend the zoning ordinance to add requirements for food trucks on private property in the B4 Culinary Arts and Hospitality District as detailed in attached ordinance 16-15A, which removes the requirement in section 21-622A that food truck operators own or operate a restaurant in the city or be in partnership with the owner and or operator in the city. Also in your packet, as Mr. Freiling noted, Mayor Freiling noted, is staff's recommendation of 16-15, which keeps that requirement in there. Under PCR 16-10, the recommendation was to rezone approximately 76 acres on Capitol Landing Road, as noted in Ordinance 16-16 and the attached map. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Ms. Murphy?
No questions, just a couple comments.
Before the public hearing, or would you like?
I'll do that later.
Just a question. We have to approve all of these today, or can we, if council wanted to, could we break it up and revisit one of these next month, or are they interdependent?
Council can approve or deny or postpone as they see fit on any of the items. That would delay implementation, obviously, as well.
Question? Ms. Murphy, may I ask you a question on the PCR 16-009?
Yes, sir.
You said, I believe, something to the effect of a food truck needs to be removed when the business closes.
Yes, sir.
I'm assuming, maybe I shouldn't do that it's sufficient for the food truck to cease operations when the business closes, have time to pack themselves up and move?
That's correct.
Or they don't have to have vacated the property?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
That's the intent.
With that, we will open the public hearing. Anybody who would like to come forward and address council on any of these recommendations, please come forward. Not much activity today. With that, we will close the public hearing, and I'll come back to City Council for discussion, action.
Well, I think this is a lot of great work that the staff has put together, and as Ms. Murphy has said, it provides the opportunity to revitalize that area and create some excitement in that part of the city. And I think that the way that they're worded creates an intertwinement that one helps stimulate the next one. The only question that I have in concern is requiring the food truck to have an ownership in a restaurant in the city. I would be more in favor of adopting Planning Commission's 16-15A. As one resident said to me, by restricting the food truck operation, it limits the entrepreneurial spirit that we're trying to achieve in the city. So that's the only comment that I have for it. Otherwise, let's go.
Thank you. Yeah, this new B4 district is a long time coming. You know, we've been studying and researching and doing analysis of Capitol Landing Road since I had hair.
It's been a long time.
And so I'm really proud that staff has gotten us to a point where they've presented something, an option here, based on what they've heard from councils and members of the community, that will help this section of the city move forward in a new positive way, kind of bring some energy and some life to this corridor, which will ultimately, I think, it spearheads kind of the bringing traffic to Capitol Landing Road, which is one of the hallmarks of any successful business, is having a lot of cars driving by and potential shoppers, and it creates a destination versus just somebody going by through happenstance. And so I'm very supportive of these changes. I think the PCR 16008 and 010 are very straightforward to me. It's the food truck that I still have some questions about, and I don't know that I have the answers or they can be answered today. I think Ms. Ramsey was right on target with one of my concerns is, by causing a food truck to have to be owned partially by an existing restaurant does take away that entrepreneurial spirit. It also takes away the creativity that comes with variety. For example, if the owners of Copper Fox wanted to bring in a food truck, they might just be limited to who could come. I know, for example, in York County, there's a successful brew pub or brewery that does food trucks, and there seems to be a rotation of food trucks there that's very popular. And if you have that 30% ownership clause in there, you might lose that variety. But with that said, I'm very cognizant of the bricks and mortar restaurants that have made hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars investment in the city, and this is competition, and it might be somewhat unfair competition, and so I haven't gotten my brain around that fully, and I'd like to hear more from rest of council and maybe some other restaurateurs and other business people, but this is an excellent step in the right direction, I think, for a district, and I think from this, we might be able to look at other parts of the city and kind of pick apart what was successful here and implement them in other parts of the city. And so I think this is great.
Thank you. Mr. Zhang?
Yeah, I think I echo all the remarks that I said already. Just like Ms. Ramsey said, I do have concerns about the ordinance as stated right now regarding food trucks and its operators, and I do favor Planning Commission's recommendation on that front. Without going too much into it, I'd like the by right uses from the B4. I think it makes sense that we want to promote a culinary arts district with this, and the by right uses and the conditional uses with it makes sense. And I think just speaking with folks who live around that area, in the residential area, I think it's going to be really exciting to see the potential that this recently will do. And this is just, one small part of it. So excited to get the ball rolling. So,
thank you. I think it's worth noting two things. Well, probably several, but I'll start with two. The food truck recommendation was something that was initially brought up and championed by Vice Mayor Foster, who's not here today. So I just want to thank him for that. The second thing about the proposed food truck ordinance and staff's recommendation is that the bricks and mortar connection was something that came out of council conversation from the very beginning, where we were talking about what Mr. Pons was just addressing. How do you encourage this entrepreneurial injection into the community without compromising the significant investment of people who've been doing business here for years or decades or longer? And so I have sent a message to the executive director of the Williamsburg Area Restaurant Association, asking for them to reach out to their community and see if there's any input that they would like to share. I would like to hear that, and I think having a little more time to give them an opportunity to respond could be helpful. So for those reasons, I would support holding off on 16-009 for 1 month, unless, Mr. Collins, you want to counsel us on some concern. And if we go ahead and do 08 and 10, then that gives us an opportunity to move forward with some of the more complicated aspects of this little triumvirate of ordinances. You don't see an obstacle there?
Question for the attorney would be, would adopting a use ordinance that allows a use that refers to a section that doesn't exist
Well, so I'm sitting here looking at it, and it's food trucks in accordance with Section 21.622, and if you don't have a 21.622, food trucks are not allowed. So I think for purposes of council's discussion, if you defer that matter for 1 month, that would be acceptable. If that's going to be a long-term decision, then we would need to go back and remove subsection E from Section 4.
No, I think we would, oh, you go ahead.
Well, so I'm looking forward to supporting food trucks
Yes.
in this B4 district. I just want to make sure that the language and how it's written will provide the best opportunity for food trucks to be successful and our bricks and mortar restaurants to be successful.
And the reality of the practical circumstances is we could approve the food trucks today, but as written, there will not be a food truck in that district for some time because there are, not, at least not that I'm aware of, any existing food trucks that have that 30% bricks and mortar city restaurant ownership component. So it would take time to even gear that up. Whereas if we did go with the Planning Commission's more broadly based approach that's more inclusive of food trucks from the region, then food trucks could be in there pretty quickly as soon as that passes.
We don't even know if any, or do we know if any of the bricks and mortar restaurants have any interest in coming up with food trucks?
That's correct. We do not.
And I think one of the other things that Ms. Murphy said is that this is a narrowly defined area, so it's not as if those food trucks are going to compete with bricks and mortar restaurants in a broad area. And to me, I see them as an addition to the experience that people are going to have when they're going to a particular establishment in that new B4 zone.
So I'll just throw in a couple of other comments. We've talked about at length the fact that we have limited commercial property in the city. This is an area that's zoned commercially, and it's on a corridor, which makes it important. And it's a formerly vibrant corridor that used to have lots of traffic going up and down it, but times and traffic patterns have changed, and that's impacted the level of business that's conducted here. What we're talking about is only the commercial section. It is not a change in the zoning for the residential sections farther up and behind, below and above, I guess I could say, based upon the diagram. So it's not going to change the residential character of those areas. And at the same time, it kickstarts redevelopment while hopefully or potentially adding to the vibrancy of the community. What I think is really worth noting is that what we're talking about here are 3 ordinances that control regulations in a commercial stretch of the road. It does not deal with the built environment. That is another aspect of this that staff would be implementing in different ways, where we make streetscape adjustments that will change what really was a traffic conduit to get from one place to another into an area that has its own sense of place, into an area where there's a more pedestrian-friendly environment, where a pedestrian who wants to get from one side of the street to the other may not have to cross 4 lanes of traffic with a central turn lane, which it's a pretty long way to go. So the more we can do to create an ambiance or a special feel to this area to complement this regulatory change, the more I think we will have that impact over the long term. So I think they're all terrific. I am supportive of not moving on PCR 16-009 until next month, unless Ms. Ramsey, Mr. Zhang feel strongly otherwise. Okay, so
and let me just add another question to the food truck. One of the stated issues was that a food truck had to leave a premise after the close of a business. But what if that business owns the food truck? Can they not store their food truck on their property? And so that's just a little consideration, I think, that needs to be maybe thought about and presented maybe next month.
So can we do that? We'll do these one at a time. And do we need to vote to table?
To table or postpone.
Mr. Mayor, I move to City Council approve ordinance 16-014.
Second.
Ms. Walton, we have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Let's see, food trucks. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to, I move that City Council postpone making a decision on PCR number 009, the food truck regulation, until next month, or continue the discussion until next month.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
2 for 2. You want to go for third?
I'll try. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move that City Council approve 16-010, the B4 Culinary Arts and Hospitality District rezoning.
Be the ordinance, correct?
16-16?
I'm sorry, yep, 16-16. I've lost it, but
Ordinance 16-16.
I amend my motion to.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Walton?
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
That takes us to the monthly financial statement.
Just wanted to point out to council that the tourism revenues and revenues in general did rebound slightly in August, as indicated in the report. While not exceptional and still requiring monitoring, they did start tracking more in line with the previous year, as opposed to over the summer where they took a little dip over the previous year. We'll continue monitoring that closely. Staff is also looking at revenues. I would point out that if you look at our, not revenues, expenses, if you look at our expenses, there is a gap between the expenses at this time from last year to this year. If you'll recall that our general fund operation budget is 2.75% higher, so you would anticipate nearly a 3% higher expense rate from the previous year. A couple other items to point out on that are there's an extra payroll considered. There's 7 payrolls within this amount versus 6 at this time last year. That's an additional $350,000 difference, as well as there was a larger school draw, approximately $600,000 compared to last year. So if you look at those two expenses plus the additional increase in budget of last year to this year, we are tracking actually a little bit below where we should be, but we are keeping that in a close eye on our expenses versus our revenues, considering the revenues were a little soft over the summer. But if you have any specific questions, Phil and I are here to answer.
Questions for Mr. Collins? No? Thank you. Monthly departmental operating reports.
Department heads are at your leisure if any questions came up from reviewing the reports.
Any questions? No. This takes us to city manager reports.
Okay.
First is the creation of the Williamsburg Tourism Zone, proposed ordinance 16-19.
And Michelle DeWitt, our Economic Development Director, will lead that discussion.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of City Council. Good to be here today. Carolyn set the stage nicely, and then Council in its discussion continued it nicely about the Northeast Triangle. This is another one of our proposals to encourage private investment in that area and more activity and more vibrancy. And as Carolyn said, this fits in with the city's goals and the past biennial goals, and as Mr. Pons said, we've been talking about it for quite a while. And it's a three-pronged effort. One is Public Works looking into streetscapes improvements and the built environment improvement there. Secondly, the zoning that you've already discussed. And then thirdly, how do economic incentives attract the private market to invest and attract customers there? And that's the part I'll be talking about today. And the Williamsburg Tourism Zone is what's on the table. Here is a map of the zone. So this looks a little bit different than Carolyn's map on the zoning district. The zoning district was just on Capitol Landing Road. This tourism zone includes the entire area we call the Northeast Triangle. So bounded by, I don't know if, Queens Creek up here at the north, York County on the west. The Visitor Center, Colonial Williamsburg Visitor Center is part of this Northeast Triangle. On the south, it's the CSX railroad tracks. And then on the east, it's York County and James City County a little bit here. So, or no, it's all York County, sorry, on that side. So it's this entire area that we're talking about tourism zone proposal. So what is a tourism zone? It's a way to increase investment or try to encourage more private investment in the Northeast Triangle. It's one of the tools that the state allows cities to do is to create tourism zones. Where we can offer local tax incentives to encourage certain targeted businesses to come to this area of the city. It also gives us access to the state incentive program around tourism zones. And we've talked conceptually about this before, but there is state gap financing money on the table that can happen through a tourism zone if a game-changing project comes to the city. So this will set the stage for that as well. So what businesses, I mentioned it's a way to target certain businesses to come to an area of the city. So what we're talking about in a tourism zone is businesses whose customers reside outside of the local area. So it's not you and me and our audience who lives here going out to eat and shop. This is people coming from out of town to spend their money. Hence tourism and hospitality. And so the uses we've identified will look very familiar to you based on your earlier work today. Our culinary and hospitality uses, and these match the zoning district that you just approved. So it's the hotels, motels, timeshares, theaters, bake shops, restaurants, museums, micro beverage, culinary schools, retail, and art studios and workshops. So again, things that are attracting customers from outside the area, making this area a destination where people want to spend time, have fun, and spend money. All commercial uses is another thing to point out here. There is some residential area in this zone, but these incentives are targeted just to the commercial business uses. We've The issue of chain and franchise businesses is a common discussion, particularly in the tourism world. And so what this ordinance says is that if you're a franchise or a chain that's not currently in the greater Williamsburg area, which is defined as James City County, the city of Williamsburg, and Bruton portion of York County, if you're the first one coming in and you're a brand or a franchise, you're eligible for our incentives. But if you're already in the district and you're a national franchise or brand, then we're not offering our local incentives. We also we added some language into the ordinance that makes it clear this would not prohibit a locally owned business from opening a second location in the tourism zone. So somebody who already has a business here but is not a chain or a franchise, is a locally owned or locally created business without that franchise, is welcome to partake of these incentives. There are some minimum investment criteria, and these are capital investments. So these are investments made on fixed assets for the long term for a business's success and efficiency and profitability. They're not working capital or day-to-day operations. And we have a definition in the ordinance that explains capital investment. The minimum requirement would be for a new business coming into the area would be $250,000, and an existing business would need to invest $50,000 to be eligible for the program. There's some other scoring criteria to determine the range of incentives that a business would be eligible for, and those are around the sales that the business projects and the local tax generation, our return on investment that will come off of those sales, job creation, public art contribution, live performing arts or art for sale in the building, healthy foods or pedestrian-friendly designs that exceed the city requirements. These are all elements of City Council's goals and initiatives and the city's initiatives. And so it's a sliding scale. Each business will be scored depending on how their application meets these goals. So what are the local incentives? Much like when we've done this with other incentive programs, we're maintaining all existing tax revenue. So we're not giving up any existing tax revenue. This is offering a refund of new tax revenue that comes into the city because of these incentives. So it refunds a portion of that future new tax revenue around your business license tax, BPOL, the 1% local portion of sales tax, and the 5% room and meals taxes. It also offers a zoning and building fee waiver. These are common incentives because these are taxes and regulatory issues that the locality controls, so we can offer these as refunds in these districts. And I'm going to go through some scenarios about how that plays out in a real-world application. So the time frame that we have in the ordinance is that it's a maximum of 5 years that a business could get these incentives. And as I mentioned before, there's those scoring criteria that relate to the city's goals that will impact the time and the percentage of refund that is given. And this is an overview of that. You see that all the incentives are heavier at year one and then decline over time. The percentages are the same. So for BPOL, sales, room, and meal tax, you can see in year one, depending on how a business scores, it could receive 30 to 100% of those taxes back as a refund. Year two, 20 to 80%. Year three, 10 to 60. Year four, 0 to 40. And year five, 0 to 20. Again, I think this will make sense when we go through some examples. So here's an example. We have a new restaurant that comes to the tourism zone, invests $80,000 in capital investment, creates 20 jobs, has healthy, locally sourced food on the menu. And again, these are all things that affect the scoring criteria for the business. They're projecting $1 million in annual sales in year one and $1.5 million in annual sales in years 2 through 5. So what we've done is plug that into the formulas that I went over on the slide before. And in this case, the business receives 3 years worth of incentives. And you can see that in year one, it's $37,200 is refunded to the business. The net new city revenue is $24,800, and you take that over the 5-year period, you see that the business, $93,000 is refunded to the business, and $341,000 is the net new taxes or return on investment received by the city. One thing that's really cool about these incentives, the BPOL tax is a tax that the business pays, so they pay that tax and it will be refunded. The other 3 taxes are taxes that the customers pay. The sales tax, the meals tax, and the room tax. So that's an added boon to the business. It's not something they paid and it's given back. It's something their customers actually paid and is given back to them. We did review these with people in the industries, and they agreed that the incentives we're offering are enough to move the needle for someone to take a second look and really consider coming to this location. I have 2 more examples, bear with me. We have an expansion of an existing restaurant. So I wanted to talk about how an existing business could also use these incentives. You'll remember that in order to qualify, an existing business has to invest at least $50,000 of capital investment. So in this scenario, they're doing a $100,000 capital investment, renovation or expansion, 8 new jobs, healthy food, contribution to public art, and live music. So these are, again, the things we want to see in this area of the city. They're projecting new sales, so they probably expanded and have quite a few more tables and kitchen capacity, or maybe they're opening up for another meal. Maybe they've only been open for lunch and breakfast, and now they're opening up for dinner. They're projecting $750,000 in new annual sales in year one and $1 million in new annual sales in years 2 through 5. And you can see under this scenario, the business actually qualifies for 5 years worth of incentives. And so we have, again, the net new revenue to the city, $124,000 over 5 years. the business is refunded $170,500. So you can see that on an increased sales of $1 million, that's enough to attract attention for people to look at investing here. Lastly, we talked about a pretty big investment, a new hotel with a restaurant, investing $11 million, 25 new jobs, pedestrian friendly. This scored as high as you could score on the criteria that we're proposing. And they're saying $2.3 million in sales year 1, $3 million in years 2 through 5. And you can see that they qualify for 5 years, as I mentioned, starting at 100%, going to 80, 60, 40, 20% over time for a total of a little over $500,000 of tax refund from the city. And the city's still netting $371,000. Another thing to remember is in year 6, the city starts to net the entire 100%, which is how economic incentives are designed. So next steps with the tourism zone, and I think someone earlier said we learned from having done other zones. We've done an incentive district in the arts district in the city. Excuse me. So staff really talked about what went well and what was missing in that effort. And one thing was professional targeted marketing. So City Council was kind enough to appropriate $10,000 to the EDA above their standard allocation each year for them to use for new business recruitment. So staff is suggesting that money be used to do professional targeted marketing to get culinary arts and hospitality investment into this district. I mentioned in the beginning it's packaged with zoning infrastructure plans and a small business investment grant, which you'll be hearing about more next month, as a whole package to increase attention and shine the light for private investment to come to this area of the city. We'll also, as we do with all programs, monitor investment, excuse me, vacancy rate, use mix, available property, what's the impact of this project, and report back to the City Council and EDA over time. That's it. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
I just had a couple. So you said that projected sales, but it would actually be based on the actual sales.
Yes, ma'am.
And as far as an expansion, so what happens during the construction period, or if they're still operating, or
Sure.
how do you sort of measure that?
Good question. So we actually have written into the ordinance that the business can pick what its first year is. So another thing that may happen is not only will they be under construction and renovation during part of the year, but they may do that well within a calendar year, and so their tax payments. Excuse me. Get my water. So let's say they open in November. That calendar year worth of tax payments they make is pretty small, so we've given them that they can choose the next full calendar year as their first year of incentives, and that's very typical in economic development programs. It's also how we do it in the arts district as well. But to answer your question, we would start calculating the new taxes from when they open after the renovation. So let's say it's an existing business that currently offers lunch and breakfast and wants to expand and offer dinner. It would happen after all those construction activities were done. The service staff was hired and the dinner menu actually came online. But then secondarily, they could say, let's say that happens in November, they could say, well, we want to wait till the next full calendar year.
Okay. But otherwise, I think it's another example of excellent work by staff putting together tools to really revitalize the area. Thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you, Michelle. I won't make you talk that much, but this is something that really complements the discussion that we just had. And again, all driven to find ways, tools to stimulate new businesses, to help encourage existing business to reinvest in themselves. Again, to be a destination where people who with money in their wallets want to go spend it. And that's kind of been the discussion about the Northeast Triangle and Capitol Landing Road, 2nd Street, for some years now. And so having these incentive packages available to entrepreneurs is exactly what I think the city ought to be doing. And I think the point that Ms. DeWitt makes about, the incentive is on net new dollars being spent. It's not on what a business already calculates. So it's not going to cost the city initially, and hopefully if it works out well, the city and the residents will do very well by this. And so our toolbox of economic incentive just got bigger. It's on wheels now, and so I think we've got some real momentum here, so thank you.
A comment and then a couple questions. First, excellent work, and I really commend you and staff for putting up such a creative and comprehensive plan with the tourism zone. I think it's exciting because it falls in line, one, with the GIO's stated policy goals and also with the economic development strategic goals outlined from past councils, and now it's carried towards the present council. I think it's going to be beneficial because this tool will be able to guide what we really want to see in that area as we revitalize that area and promote the culinary arts district. But also I think it makes us more competitive too because of all these attractive incentives to want to bring these businesses into the area. So the scenarios you gave were solid, and I'm really excited to see where this takes us in the next coming months, years, whatever the period is. Just a couple questions. From what I understand, when I was looking into Newport News tourism zones in the prior internship before council, they developed a marketing plan. And I'm not sure about the timeline in terms of whether they did it along the way as a work in progress or if they had it before they established and passed it to council. Is this something that you and staff are looking to do and kind of see how the culinary arts district kind of develops in a certain amount of time?
Yes, great question and good point. We definitely do need a targeted marketing strategy and a professional plan and collateral to make this effective. We all may know about it, but we need people who want to invest and build culinary arts and hospitality businesses in this area to know about it. So there is a $10,000 appropriation to the EDA.
Okay.
That was made specifically to recruit new businesses. Mm-hmm. So we plan to use that if this is approved by City Council today to move forward to do a professional marketing.
Perfect. Also, in terms of just kind of seeing, because this is all brand new, this is one part of three package, a package deal, or it's the big toolboxes, Doug Pons has said. Is there going to be a re-evaluation period? Because I'm looking at the additional scoring criteria. I think there is a lot of potential to develop that as well, maybe provide additional scoring criteria or maybe take out some that might not work out. And I had two points to that. I serve on the board with the Greater Peninsula Workforce Consortium, and we are having these conversations, very relevant discussions of how to develop workforce development in this peninsula region. And one of the biggest problems in these workforce development programs is trying to get employers to the table. So if there is a way, if there is a reevaluation period where we can see, maybe we want to add, this criteria to promote greater workforce development, maybe an employer may want to be incentivized to send workers to workforce programs, training programs per se, and even the simplest, I guess, is SWAM certification. Small women and minority-owned businesses. I think that's a big, important part of developing the creative economy that your memo outlines as well. So is there going to be a time period for evaluating?
Certainly. We as I mentioned, we will look at the return on investment and report back to City Council and the EDA about what's happening. And there certainly are opportunities to update the ordinance, but there's also opportunities to add those goals to the criteria for scoring without even updating the ordinance under council's wishes. So with workforce, as you know, on the peninsula, they often will pay 75% a employee's wage while they're going through training and pay 75% of the training, but the employer still has to come up with the other 25%. So there's certainly areas the city could look in to step in and enhance what's already offered by our partners. So Marvin may want to mention a timeline if we would do that in 6 months or a year.
I think staff was talking around a 6 month, enough time to get it implemented, get the marketing plan out, and then evaluate the effectiveness of the marketing plan initially and see if we need to make any movements at that time. This is one stick in a bundle of economic development programs that are available from the federal, state, and local government. And so this just makes us flexible to achieve the GIO visions of council. It's the tourism zone by itself may not be completely effective, but with land use through the culinary arts, with a public investment, as the mayor mentioned, in the streetscape and public infrastructure. Staff also considered in looking at this area, is there workforce available in this area? And the Merrimack Trail multi-use zoning area provides a ready workforce nearby. If new jobs are created, that would be walkable to this area. So this also enhances quality of life for different economic classes within the city, and provides an opportunity to create that next generation of place within the city.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeWitt.
Sure.
You're not done yet. And I'll ask the first question of the city attorney just so you don't have to answer it. Although I know you would certainly be capable. This tourism zone is an overlay on the existing zoning, whether it's B4 or RS2, RS3.
It's not zoning. It's a separate, independent thing from the zoning ordinance.
Right, so nothing about it supersedes the current zoning of a
No.
property. So if there is residential property that happens to be contained within the tourism zone has no real effect on that piece of property.
The only individuals who can take advantage of the tourism zone are those that are specified in the tourism zone ordinance. So residential would not be an entity that could take advantage of that.
I just want to make sure people are clear and understand that. Ms. Ramsey touched on a question related to the scoring criteria with the forecasted additional revenue, and the real rebate or return of tax payment is based on the actual revenue, not the forecasted revenue, but the scoring of the application is based on the forecasted revenue. So what do we have in place to, nobody knows, but to the best of our ability, verify that the forecast is at least reasonable?
So everything is verified through our finance department and our Commissioner of the Revenue's office, because the taxes are paid during the calendar year, but everything is calculated after the calendar year. So I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but the business.
You have a mechanism to do this?
Yes, we have a mechanism to do
this. And I think one of the most important things here, and Mr. Witt, you touched on it. We're going to add some great tools here. We're going to put in. We've put in some zoning. We may allow food trucks. I think we probably will. We're considering creating this tourism zone. We're going to make infrastructure improvements. We're anxiously awaiting to hear about the Small Business Investment Grant Program. And we could do all this, and if nobody knows about it, it doesn't make any difference. So getting the word out to the right people in the right market segments is going to be critical to the success of this. There's some real money involved in these incentives, but they alone are not going to inspire, I don't think, somebody to come up with an idea and say, I have to create a business today to get into this tourism zone. These are about people who are already in the planning stages or considering where they're going to locate or relocate their business, and it makes this area that much more attractive by the return they can get on that investment. And as everybody said here, I think the work that's been done in the background is terrific. Take some time to see how well it works, but I'm looking forward to answering that question. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council adopt Ordinance -1619 to create the Williamsburg Tourism Zone.
Second.
Ms. Walton?
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Fryling.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Motion passes. This takes us to item number 2, the purchase of police body-worn cameras. Chief Slogey?
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. The Williamsburg Police Department, as well as the city, are protected to the safety and the welfare of the public, as well as its employees. Recordings from body-worn cameras can provide the officers with an invaluable tool to be used in criminal prosecutions. Additionally, they can protect officers and citizens from false accusations through the objective documentation of interactions between police officers and our citizens. Since my last presentation to council, we've moved through our process and we're ready to move forward with our selection of body-worn cameras. This project will be a sole source purchase with Taser International. The sole source justification exists because required goods and services are only manufactured and available from the purchase of Taser International. There isn't another vendor that reliably delivers a combination of point-of-view, high-definition recording, 12-hour battery life, which is important for us, automatic triggers. Since the last presentation, we've added technology. When the officer turns on their lights in the car, it will automatically trigger all body cameras within 75 feet to come on if they're on or not by the officer. A dock and walk workflow, which, Mayor, I think you heard me describe as we put the camera in the dock and it poof, and it goes up to the cloud last time I was talking about it. A prosecutor platform for Commonwealth Attorney Nate Green, who's already familiar with this platform. It will save officers from having to immediately make copies every day and carry them over to Commonwealth Attorney's office. He will have secure access to it. And forensic authentication, which is extremely important, where no one can do anything to these videos without it being documented and tagged. And more importantly than anything, an unlimited evidence.com storage, which is CJIS compliant. Commonwealth Attorney Nate Green has been supportive of this and assisted us with the development of our policy. City Attorney Chris Shelton has reviewed and approved not only our contract but our policy, and I'd like to acknowledge her and thank her for her efforts in that as well. The project includes the purchase of body-worn cameras, federally mandated CJIS secure digital storage, a 5-year contract that ensures maintenance, storage, and upgrades of the body-worn cameras and our Taser electronic weapons. Money was budgeted in the fiscal year 17 budget for $60,000 for the initial purchase of the equipment. The remaining years of the contract, fiscal year 18 through 21, will be through the operational budget. We expect 6 to 8 weeks. As soon as council approves, I will order these in the next couple of days, and expect 6 to 8 weeks to have training, have the equipment here, and to deploy the cameras on the officers. We request and recommend the council award the purchase of the Taser-worn body cameras, equipment, maintenance, and secure storage at a cost for 5 years of $221,567. Glad to answer any questions.
Questions?
Thank you, Chief Slogey. I think this is a critical step forward for our police department and our citizens to have this type of, to have cameras just to help ensure the safety of both the police officers and the public. So commend you for getting us to this point. A couple questions. You described how the cameras come on. When you turn the lights on in the vehicle, the camera will come on. I presume it's worn on the chest somewhere.
You're right in the chest, and you can also turn it on with just a hit.
It's a touch. When do they go off?
They will go off when you turn them off,
right,
or the policy describes when they can be turned off or when they can't be turned off. If it's a situation where the policy requires them to be on, you can't turn them off until the situation is over.
Okay. So along with this will be a written policy and training that staff will go through.
Yes, sir.
I understand. Okay.
Not only that, but the staff was solicited for input, and as usual with policies, we send out other items of the policy were added. The policy was developed through several models: the International Association of Chiefs of Police, Department of Criminal Justice Services, input from the ACLU, and numerous other policies around the state of Virginia and the country. It's probably most similar to Henrico, who Chief Doug Middleton is a CALEA commissioner, and we worked really closely. It's probably most mirrors them as any other department.
And how many cameras will we be getting, and then who wears them, and what officers or department employees don't wear them?
We're getting 35 cameras. Investigators have been added to it since our last meeting. There are two department employees that won't be, and that will be probably the Deputy Chief of Police and Mayor Galvin in our support services.
Thank you again. I commend you for getting us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, for all your time. I know you've spent a lot of time researching into the resources and available options, so just wanted to thank you and staff for looking into it.
Sure.
Chief, if I heard you correctly, you said that an officer could take the camera, put it into a dock, and poof, the video goes up to the cloud. Is poof a technical term?
No, sir. It wasn't the last time we discussed this, and it's not this time.
I understand.
but I thought it best described exactly what happened.
Ms. Shelton, how is this handled by FOIA? How does that deal with video?
A lot of that depends on what the video is of. So criminal incident information is disclosable under FOIA, but the supporting information related to a criminal investigation is not necessarily disclosable under FOIA. Non-criminal incident information has different rules, and so it really depends on what the video is taken of, how we classify it, and then how we treat it under FOIA.
So somebody internally, is somebody making that decision, or are there a set of objective criteria that...
It's in the Code of Virginia. There is some discretion with respect to releasing documentation pertaining to criminal incident information. So criminal incident information is a limited set of data. It's the first page of a report. And normally when you have a criminal incident, there's a narrative from the police officer, there's photographs of the evidence, there's other documentation that's associated with that, and that is what the police chief has discretion to disclose or not disclose. The same is true with non-criminal incident information. There's limited data that we have to provide. There's other data that the police chief has discretion to provide. And so we have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. The conducted electronic weapons, or CEWs, are those what we commonly call tasers?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We currently use tasers?
Yes, sir.
Or are we just replacing the existing?
Well, we can replace them within 5 years. We're going to move forward. When they turn on, they also trigger the body camera with the new technology. So okay. As soon as you turn your taser on, if you haven't turned your body camera on, it will come on.
I'd just like to add to what's previously been said about the value of a system like this to building trust within the community. It's an objective recount of a circumstance that is not flavored in any way except by the person who happens to be viewing it. And so I think that does nothing but help build relationships between the police and the community, which are vitally important. And if everybody knows they're on film, sometimes people behave differently, even in non-criminal situations. There's just an impact on people's behavior by knowing there's a video record.
Except here on council.
Well, pretty much. But
there was a study I think I brought up in the last presentation, Rialto, California. In the study, it showed that there was less use of force by police officers and less need to use force because of the public's perception of the fact that they're being recorded.
It'd be interesting if, I would assume that, I can assume all I want, but it would be interesting to know if it also assists with de-escalation, where you have a situation that's gotten to a difficult point and the officer's working to bring the tenor of the conversation or the interaction down, and if the camera helps with that. So, turn to council for a motion.
I so move that council award the purchase of taser body-worn cameras and conducted electronic weapons, equipment, maintenance, and secure storage at a 5-year cost of $221,567.
Seconded.
Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, Chief. This takes us to our draft 2017 legislative agenda. Mr. Trevette?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Today we're going to be discussing the draft 2017 legislative agenda. And what I thought we would do is just kind of walk through it a little bit pretty quickly. The first thing I want to talk about is what is a legislative agenda, for those of you who may not be familiar with it. Legislative agendas have really caught on across the country, but particularly in the Commonwealth. And they're generally designed to be a tool to educate local legislators on communities' policy feelings on particular issues. Some of the common features of a legislative agenda, one that's effective, is that they should be brief. They shouldn't be complete dissertations on an issue. They're just supposed to give a person a very quick glimpse of the city's policy on that issue. As I said, quick reference and action-oriented. You really don't want to have issues included in your legislative agenda that the city can't have some kind of impact on, which relates to the exclusivity of it. If you make it so broad, then it tends to be something that most legislators will just overlook because they don't want to get into that kind of detail with a city that can't impact a federal or national issue. So our agenda today, the draft is broken up into 4 components. The final agenda will not be divided in this way. The reason that I have done this is just for the ease of your understanding where the issues have come from. So the first category are issues that were carried over from the 2016 session. There were a number of issues in that agenda that are still kind of broad policy issues that the city has an interest in that will no doubt come up again in this session. And so we want to make sure that those are reflected in the final draft that's adopted. The second category are the staff-driven issues. As we work through the work agendas of the year, we encounter issues that would relate to necessary changes in legislation, and those are included in the staff-recommended issues. Number 3 are the partner agency issues. As I said, legislative agendas have become very popular, not just for local governments, but for other entities as well. And so if you look around the region, you'll find lots of places adopting legislative agendas, many of whom are contemplating the contents of those agendas at this very moment. So what we've done is we've tried to collect some of those. The ones that are in the draft that you have are all from Virginia Municipal League, only because they adopted their agenda last week. The other agencies, and we're going to talk about that, are still in their process. And then the last category are the ones that you really need to spend the most time thinking about. And those are the items that are submitted by the residents and of course, special interest groups. And we're going to talk about those in the greatest detail. So category 1 consists of 10 items. The last year's agenda was broken into categories that included good governance, state and local partnerships, and of course transportation priorities. These are the 10 issues that in reviewing the 2016 agenda I felt like we might want to continue to carry over into next year's agenda. There are, of course, a number of issues there that we could spend a lot of time talking about. I just want to focus on a couple. I-64 widening, as we know, that construction is underway on a portion of that, one of the segments. There are still 2 other segments yet to do, and so it's important that the city stay on top of that issue and make sure that the Commonwealth know that that's a priority for the city as well. And then, of course, passenger rail. I think everybody would support that in this room. And you probably are aware that there is an effort to extend passenger rail to Hampton Roads from Richmond. The Tier 1 environmental study has been completed. There was a record of determination that resulted from that, but there's been no activity really since 2012 to pursue the Phase 2. I think, this is my supposition, that that's because most of the effort federally and at the state levels is really focused right now on the extension and improvement between Washington and Richmond. And then, of course, we had two items on this section of the agenda that related to the College of William and Mary and Thomas Nelson Community College. The College of William and Mary items were kind of broad. One was specific and related to the Fine Arts Building. Of course, that was funded last year, so we can drop that out of that section. And then Thomas Nelson Community College had several items that related to their CIP that were not funded last year, and we may want to consider continuing that inclusion. The second category are the state and local partnership categories. These are issues that kind of come from the state divisions, and these are staff-driven issues. So the first one is the Housing Authority Board membership, as we've already talked about today. The charter is required to be amended, and that does take General Assembly action, so that will be on our legislative agenda. Another item is with Colonial Behavioral Health. This is something that Human Services has identified. They would like to receive a land grant from the state at Eastern State Hospital so that they can do a campus model group home, which might reduce some of the pressures on our long-term traditional single-family neighborhoods. And then permitting of group homes, as you know, has been a popular issue of late, and that's led us to two Virginia Code amendments that we'd like to suggest to the legislature. The first deals with the notice to the community, and what it does is it would require someone contemplating a group home to notify the chief administrative officer in the locality where they're going to locate well in advance. I think that the suggestion is 90 days. And then the second provision includes school protection, essentially adopting or incorporating into state code a provision that enacts a globe or sphere around a school in which a group home with certain types of offenders cannot locate. And of course, the language that's been suggested implies that needs to be consistent with the Fair Housing Act. And then the last item is regulating internet-based businesses. This is considered a strong threat to Williamsburg and something that we really have to keep our eye on. It was in last year's agenda. We've expanded that language in the draft that you've received to include things like taxing the actual amount charged on hotel rooms that might be booked through Expedia or some other online travel booking agency. Local zoning authority to regulate where these types of uses can be located, and creating an equitable marketplace, meaning we want the online retail community, such as Airbnb, to have the same regulatory requirements as a bricks and mortar B&B would, so that you don't have that inequitable fare structure that could exist. And then lastly, and probably the most important issue, is protecting community character. And this really captures all of those issues under one umbrella, allowing us to kind of regulate these uses through our zoning ordinances and through our general laws will help us to protect the community character of Virginia. The third category, partner agency issues. As I said, all of these came from the Virginia Municipal League, which was adopted last week at their convention in Virginia Beach. And of course, we are a member of the Virginia Municipal League, and so therefore are endorsing it through our membership. The other agencies that I've contacted for items include the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance, the College of William and Mary, and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. All three of those entities are still very early in their legislative process and didn't have formal agendas to share yet. I told them, of course, that as we move through our process, they'll have the opportunity to share issues that are important to them. And just because it may not be included in our adopted agenda doesn't mean it isn't something that we can advocate for as we move through the legislative session. And then category 4, as I said, probably deserves your strongest amount of attention as you contemplate what should be included in the final adopted agenda. These are items that are submitted from outside the city, including our residents and interest groups. And I'm going to walk through them as quickly as I can. The first is an item that was submitted by a group called Let's Open Doors and relates to ADA accessibility enforcement. And what it's asking is that we adopt a resolution advocating for a statutory change that would allow localities to require compliance of structures that were built prior to the Americans with Disabilities Act being adopted to force compliance by the year 2020. Fairly aggressive resolution. The staff's done a very minor analysis on the impact of that, and of course, as you can imagine, we've got a number of buildings in the city that might be impacted by that change that would require significant staff time to enforce. The next one is a 5% local lottery sales capture, and this is suggested by Nottoway County and the communities within that county. And what they are suggesting is that the state allow a 5% remittance back to the locality from the sales of lottery tickets in their jurisdiction. Now, that 5% would be taken not out of the educational remittance that we're already receiving. And there's a good deal of information in your draft agenda that explains how all of that lottery sales is currently being operated, how much we're currently receiving year to date on the educational reimbursement, which of course goes straight to the consolidated school system. Another item is noise ordinance enforcement, and this item I need to correct in your draft agenda says that the student who suggested this actually graduates this year. He does not. He graduated in 2015. And what he is suggesting, this goes a couple years back now, is that the city support a legislative amendment of the state statute that would allow the police department to enforce civil penalties as they relate to noise ordinances. Now, the overall goal here is not to broaden the scope of power of the police department, but instead to allow the city to more effectively charge a civil penalty versus a criminal charge for the violation of the noise ordinance. And I did include some data in the packet to describe how we're doing that now as it relates to the number of noise complaints that we're investigating, and then the citations that are issued as a result of those investigations. Next, we have Medicaid expansion. Of course, this is an issue that everybody probably is very familiar with. It's been ongoing at the state now for some time. Of course, almost every year, localities across the state are asked to encourage the state government to expand Medicaid. This year, we asked Human Services to do a little bit of an analysis. They looked at census data and concluded that if Medicaid was expanded to 134% of the median income, which is what's suggested by the federal government, that it could impact as many as 2,164 residents of Williamsburg. And those are the folks that might be caught in the coverage gap. It's not to mean that, in fact, they are caught. It's just possible. And then $15 minimum wage has been suggested by a resident here. Currently in Virginia, the minimum wage is $7.25, which matches the federal standard. There are 2 states, including the District of Columbia, that have adopted resolutions or taken legislative steps that will increase their minimum wage to $15 over the next 4 to 6 years. There are 12 cities in the United States that have done that independently of their state governments as well. The right to work repeal issue is something that was suggested by the same resident. This is an issue that is somewhat popular right now because it will be on the ballot November the 8th to add right to work to Virginia's Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And essentially what that constitutional amendment will do is further protect the right to work law in the state of Virginia, make it very hard for it to be changed in the future. Most people are not expecting that there will be any other suggested changes to right to work in the upcoming legislative session of the Commonwealth. And then the last item was submitted a bit late, so it was sent out to you as an addendum to the draft, and that relates to the Syrian refugee crisis. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. That's certainly gotten a lot of news coverage nationally. What we're being asked to do is Amnesty International, the U.S. chapter of that, has asked us to adopt a resolution supporting the expansion of Syrian refugee location throughout the United States, but particularly here in Williamsburg as well. I did provide you some statistics in the draft agenda on what is happening to date, how that's occurring, and of course we can answer any questions you might have about that as we move through the process. So let's talk a little bit about the timeline for the legislative session. October today, we're presenting the draft agenda for you to consider. The next steps will be council consideration over essentially the next month. And what we're asking you to do is to ponder these issues that are included in the draft and let us know individually which items you think need to be carried over into the final version that will be presented in November. And at that point, we'll present that final version that represents the majority support of council for your adoption. The next thing that we will do is we will hold a legislative event, which I think is kind of a tradition here in Williamsburg, where we will invite all of our legislators, including the state and federal level, and try to socialize our agenda. We can do that as formally as you'd like to or as informally as you'd like to. I've seen it done all different ways, and normally how I handle that is I'd like to ask the legislators, what would you prefer? As you can imagine, they're frequently invited to a number of these types of events as they prepare to go off to Richmond to do the good work. And so I think it's important to ask them what they would prefer, what would be most comfortable for them, and most importantly, what would be most effective. And then the session begins in January. Now, of course, this is an odd-numbered year for the General Assembly, which means they will be in short session. The state statutes require that they meet for at least 30 days. However, in recent years, on odd-number events, the short session is extended to at least 45. The calendar that's been posted by Legislative Services already indicates a 45-day session. So it's just nearly impossible to keep up with the work that's being done in 60 days, let alone 30. And so session ends formally on February the 28th, according to the schedule right now. Of course, it can be extended by state statute up to 30 days. And then, of course, there is the special session and the reconvene session and a number of other sessions that no doubt will be called as a result of the work that couldn't be finished in the 30-day short session. So again, the last thing is the homework that we'd like to assign to City Council is to ponder the draft that's been prepared and let us know if there's anything that we've left out. And most importantly, let us know the items that you have support for so that we can make sure that we get them included in the final version that's presented in November. And as you do that individually, we'll be keeping tally of the majority support. The items that do not have majority support will not be included in the final version that's presented in November. That, I'll answer any questions.
Well, for someone new on City Council, I greatly appreciate you providing us the timeline and the presentation, because when I got this, it was like, yikes, what do we do? And as you were talking, before you got to the timeline, I did have a few questions. So as far as the prospect of all of these things and being brought up, what's the chance of that, and how many, as we ponder these and give feedback, how many should we expect to get attention and have action, sort of?
Sure. Well, a lot of your question relates to how active will staff be in the General Assembly session this year. And the answer to that is hard to tell, because as the pre-filing deadlines are extended this year, surprisingly, they actually started pre-filing legislation in July of this year for next year's session. And the pre-filing deadline for submission is not until early January. So that's quite a span of time for us to monitor legislation that might be introduced that would affect the city positively or negatively that we might want to go to Richmond and speak for or against. We do know that we have a charter amendment, and so that will require our presence in Richmond, at least on committee days and then the final votes in the chambers. Outside of that, those are the only times that we would necessarily be required to be there. As you contemplate the items that are in the agenda over the next month, we will be able to gauge which items are most important to this council, and that will help us determine when we need to go to Richmond and when we don't. Airbnb is one of those items that likely we probably need to have somebody there at the committee meetings when that's being discussed, if for no other reason, to understand what's said and who's saying it and the importance of that issue at the state level, so that we can come back and formulate a method of managing that if something is adopted. My suggestion on content is, as you go through this, keep in mind that it is important to have broad policy statements. Because the state needs to know that we're concerned about our continuing revenue flow from state funds. And if it weren't there, then you don't want to be the one that gets blamed for not supporting continued 599 funding. On the more particular issues, what I always say to council is just think about what the outcome will be. Does the city really have the opportunity to impact that discussion in a meaningful way? If it's something you feel strongly about, then the answer is yes. If not, then perhaps that's something that could be taken out of the agenda. As I said, you really don't want it to be so broad with so many issues that it loses its impact. And I think that's really happening kind of Commonwealth-wide now already. If you look at legislative agenda, some of them are 30, 40 pages long with complete dissertations, and that really is getting away from the point of the agenda. It'd be nice if we could keep them all to one page, but it's just not possible with the volume of bills that are considered every session.
If I may also, one second, the council last year took the opportunity to prioritize three to five legislative items, so they were able to have a little broader plank, if you will, across all the issues, but they wanted to make sure their local delegation knew that a greater intensity of focus of council was on those 3 to 5 issues, and staff could at council. I think council last year at the November work session asked staff on that Thursday to come back with the recommended priorities based on discussion of council at work session. And staff prepared that, and council adopted the legislative agenda with prioritized issues.
And do we have access to see what other people have already pre-filed?
Yes. I'm going to answer the question you asked. I'm going to answer the question you didn't ask. The question you asked is, I think, relative to legislation that's introduced by members of the House and members of the Senate. If you go to the Virginia Legislative Information Systems website, it's very easy to use. They have a tool that is free called Lobbyist in a Box. And you can sign up for that, and you have a certain amount of permissions for free that you can track certain bills, and as things happen relative to that bill, you'll receive an email telling you what's happened and driving you back to that website to see the status and what's changed. It's a very effective tool. It's not very expensive to get the full version of that and kind of have the unlimited power of tracking as many bills as you'd like to. So that is the way we would do that. The legislative session for me is cumbersome trying to track bills because the filing deadline is so close to the start of session, and then the mad rush to get everything through committee. So it really takes a tremendous amount of staff time to monitor if there's a whole host of bills that the council wants to stay informed on. And then the second question that you didn't ask is other communities' legislative agendas, and how do we know if other communities have adopted similar policy stances to ours? There's not a good way to do that. We did do a little bit of research on some of the issues that are included here from the outside sources, such as our residents and special interests, to let you know how many communities have already taken the step, how many communities might be considering that. We got a little bit of information back, but not a lot, and we'll be glad to share that with you as you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trivett. That was very informative, and I certainly do appreciate the guidance in that. And just from my perspective, I think keeping the number of items to a shorter list aids in our ability to communicate and then advocate for those things. Because I agree with you wholeheartedly that if it's too long, too extensive, you kind of get lost in the wash. And so, and I think the other important thing that you mentioned is what we ought to be advocating for in this legislative agenda are things that we really can affect. There are some national issues that I don't know that, having it on our legislative agenda would be helpful. I just muddy the water for those other things that are very important that we can affect. So.
Thank you, Mr. Trivett. Just a quick question. Is there a platform for citizens' input within the month period before City Council adopts peak democracy? Is something that come up in mind?
Sure. I think that the way that we've handled that to date is how we will handle it over the next month.
Okay.
If the community has an issue that they don't think has been represented here, the best thing for them to do is contact me, send it in, let us review it, and we'll get it out to the council to consider prior to November or at the November meeting if there are things that haven't been included.
And even if citizens have a comment on a particular legislative item, they would just email you directly.
Certainly, absolutely. Okay. And of course, then they'll have the opportunity to comment as the item is back on the agenda in November for final adoption.
Got it. Thank you.
So you talked about the legislative agenda and not only the need to keep it brief, but each point being fairly concise.
Right.
How do you reconcile that with a few of these that are asking for adopted resolutions?
Well, I think adopting a resolution is like a step beyond the agenda, right? I mean, you're sending a very concentrated message when you adopt a resolution of support. And so you kind of have to consider those as two separate issues. You could adopt a resolution of support and not include it in the legislative agenda. Although I think at the state level, certainly, if you were going to adopt a resolution of support, it should also be in the legislative agenda. Does that answer your question at all?
Somewhat. I mean, I'm taking it back to the tourism zone.
Mm-hmm.
We can make all these changes, but if we just make the changes and then that's it, well, nobody knows about it. So
Sure.
if it's, the question really is, how do you work that into the legislative agenda, which I think you answered very well. The legislative event, if I could just emphasize that you talked about, whether it's sitting around a table and having a conversation or some other format, is a public meeting, and the public is welcome to attend. But as Mr. Collins has mentioned, with council's determination last year to keep the agenda relatively brief and with some level of priority, that's been a policy that we've had for some time, so that we don't put too many things on the table so that none of them get heard. And that's really important, and I think Mr. Pons can attest to this, that we can have these conversations and we can have some great items on our legislative agenda and we can make a compelling argument to our state legislators, and their answer is, well, that's really great, but that's not going to happen. So we face that too. And there's just the political reality of Richmond. Not that they don't necessarily want these things to happen, it's just that they realize their limitation in their ability to convince all of their colleagues that it's something that should happen. So now the next step is that we consider these and we come back to Mr. Trivett or to Mr. Collins with our input.
Assistant City Manager Trivett.
We'll all consider this and let Mr. Foster know as well to come back to you. And during that, we can also have a conversation as individually with Mr. Trivett.
Right.
And so by what time or what date would you like to have the comments back?
Well, as Mr. Collins likes to say, Jerry really runs the city, so that's more a question to her than to me. I'll need to have the final version to her to be included in the packet that goes out. So, Jerry, do you want to say?
I would say probably towards the end of October.
I'd say if you take the next 2 weeks to review and then arrange a time if you have comments at the end of a 2-week period. So then before that last week, around the last week, if you can.
Sure. One thing
individually.
One thing to keep in mind is that if there are items that you want to suggest that are not on the draft, there's a considerable amount of research that I have to do to get it ready to be included in the final version. So if you've got things that are not here now, the earlier the better.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this takes us to item number 4, fiscal year 2016 school year-end spending plan, proposed resolution 16-15. Mr. Sarah?
Good afternoon, Mayor Freiling and members of council. The Williamsburg, James City County Public Schools have reported an operating surplus for fiscal year 2016, which ended June 30th of this year. The surplus is just under $3.5 million, with the majority of the surplus generated by reduced costs associated with fuel, utilities, and attrition, outlined in the information sheet provided in your agenda packet. By the terms of the joint contract between the city and James City County, the schools will be refunding the surplus back to the localities. The city's share is 9.5% for fiscal year 2016, and that amount the city will receive is $327,706. The current school contract also includes a provision that unexpended funds may be appropriated by the city and county for school purposes beyond those previously funded. School Board approved a spending plan on September 20th totaling $2.66 million for band uniforms, Lafayette High School auxiliary gym, construction, value engineering, and construction management services, and also 8 replacement school buses as outlined in the memo. The city's share of the spending plan is $252,700. So to recap, the FY16 surplus is returned to the localities, and a majority of that surplus is being requested to be appropriated by the city and county in fiscal year 2017 as capital spending projects. The James City County Board of Supervisors unanimously approved the spending plan by resolution on Tuesday night, and the county share of the plan was slightly in excess of $2.4 million. Resolution number 16-15 will appropriate the city's share of expenditures outlined in the memo in the city's sales tax fund for the current fiscal year 2017. And Olwen Heron, acting school superintendent, and Christina Berta, the CFO for the schools, are also here to answer any questions you may have.
Questions or comments?
No questions, just a comment that I support the staff's recommendation and feel that our contribution would make a definite impact, particularly to Lafayette, where there are so many city high school age students attending.
I echo that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sarah. I'm more than happy to support this year-end spending plan.
I'd just like to take a moment and thank our counterparts and partners on the James City County Board of Supervisors for supporting this. And to the Board of Supervisors and the school board and the school administration for coming together and making the auxiliary gym at Lafayette High School possible. This is something that's been under consideration for many, many years. It came off the list for a while, but with the advocacy from some parents and a lot of work on the parts of the school administration, school board, and as I said, our colleagues in James City County, now it's about to become a reality. And for anybody who's not been on a tour of Lafayette High School and seen the conditions, it's not that the conditions are bad, the conditions are just limited, where you have these terrific students who are trying to compete on the athletic court or field, and they don't even have an opportunity to practice, particularly in bad weather. And yet, they're still consistently one of the most decorated high school athletic programs in the state of Virginia. This brings us one step closer to equity among school facilities throughout the division, and I think it's really important. And again, it wouldn't happen without our colleagues in James City County stepping up and helping. I also think the school bus replacement program is, I don't want to say it's urgent, but it's critically important to keep an adequate, safe fleet in operation because they're carrying our youngsters to and from school every day. Do I hear a motion?
I move that City Council approve Resolution 16-15, FY 2016 School Year-End Spending Plan.
Second.
Ms. Walton.
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Freiling.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Motion passes. We're getting closer. Now we have item number 5, Goals, Initiatives, and Outcomes for 2017-18 Biennium First Draft.
Great. Thank you, Council. Much like the legislative agenda, this is presented tonight as for your information item. It's a very inclusive goals and initiatives portion. So just reminding Council of the process today. We started with individual interviews with council members and department heads to see where you are from the past and where your minds were looking forward. To get ideas and make sure they were included within this process. Then bringing the individual thoughts to a collective effort through a series of council retreats where staff participated with council and then council took on their policy discussion moving forward. Then going beyond the organizational walls and asking for community input through a formal community workshop, which was completed, going beyond the traditional community workshop to a digital workshop format that was more aggressively marketed this year, and we'll go into that a little bit. And that brings us to today. It's a first inclusive draft that captures what your Planning Commission has said, what your Economic Development Authority has said, what council said, department heads said, and what citizens have said in a broad strategic level wording. Moving forward in the process, you'll note that the City Council's second draft review, which will be of a complete document, will be at the work session of November 7th with a projected adoption on November 10th, and then the State of the City event on November the 17th to report back on what we've accomplished and what Council looks forward to accomplishing over the next 2-year period. The citizens are invited to stay engaged with the process through our city website, and there is a page dedicated to the GIO process where the current document and draft documents will be made available for review by the public. And I think in all these processes, we assume in Williamsburg, which has such a storied history, that everybody knows the history and the process. And I think it's important to continually reflect on what this process is, because it's the you basically have two major work products as a council. The first is your budget, and the second is your strategic planning. This is your strategic planning process that populates our budgets the next 2 years. It guides us on our 5-year capital improvement plan development. It guides us into comprehensive planning processes. It sets a tone for your advisory boards and where they work within the city and what staff is working to implement. This is what staff is measured against annually on what we've achieved and what we've been able to achieve within these policy statements. And they start with the G and the GIOs with the goal statements, having that broad policy statement. And tied to your vision. Your vision is that long-term view. The I gets into initiatives, so we're funneling down to how do we achieve goals? What are strategic directional items that the city can act on that are concrete and measurable that we can move towards goal implementation? They're linked directly to the 5-year CIP. They're focused on new or renewed. And I should point out, it's not a comprehensive list of what the city does. There are a lot of very core functions that have to happen whether or not they're in the GIOs. You will not see that the police department will respond when you call 911 in the GIOs. All right, that's a core level of service. When you turn on your water or you flush your toilet, you expect certain things to happen. Those aren't in the GIOs. Those are core levels of service that we're just expect to get done. This is beyond that core level. This is the future-leaning vision. Outcomes talk about quantified measures. That's the desired outcome of the initiative. And it's the performance measurement by staff of how did we move or did we not? Did we regress and why? So it's a constant evaluation by staff to report back on how we're achieving successfully or unsuccessfully in implementing the city's vision and your policy goals. The outcome measures will be included between now and November. Listening to priorities. This is a very inclusive process. It goes beyond what management and staff thinks. This is where council has listened to the community, listened to your electorate, and you're establishing your priority vision. And it started with a community meeting. Traditional community meetings tend to draw particular segments of the population at this time. It attracted 19 citizens. 17 at that meeting participated in the survey. New this year was the Peak Democracy product and Open Public Forum. What was very interesting is there were 164 additional site visits to the Open Forum site. The site included a survey that matched the survey provided at the public workshop. It also allowed for input like the idea trees that were at the public workshop. So it was a digital mimicking of our public workshop. And because of that digital platform, we received 38 registered responses. They identified who they were and where they lived, so we could identify whether or not they were a city resident or not a city resident in their response. And there were an additional total of 85 responses registered and unregistered. And so if you look at approximately 20 minutes of participation doing the survey and answering the questions per participant, that's equivalent. If one of them came to you every 20 minutes and was talking, that'd be approximately 35 hours of public input on the GIOs at this point digitally and on the platform, compared to what input we received tonight in public hearings, if you evaluate it that way. So it was an inclusive process. Along the 8 goal lines, it did come up with 123 initiatives at this point. And so you have a first draft document in front of you. In our retreat, we talked about going to 6 or maybe at 7 goals. When we actually got the initiatives, there were twice as many initiatives in that combined goal of character of the city and economic vitality. It really made it a lopsided document to one goal. When you split the 2 back out, it divided the initiatives nicely between 8 goal areas. So staff's recommendation at this point is to return to an 8-goal document. It does include the 123 initiatives at this point from Council, Planning Commission, Economic Development Authority, citizens, and the departments. It's very inclusive wording. The wordings provide direction that I would ask you to look at the wording and the direction of the initiatives in the coming month, which gets us to the next steps for the month. Much like the legislative agenda, I'd like, again, the homework word came up for council. This is the homework month, evidently. Thank you, Mr. Trivett, for using that word. Over the next 2 weeks, if council would review and provide feedback to management, this one would be to me, about where you feel the direction is, the wording, and whether or not something needs to be in or outside of the document by what's provided. If you have a question about where a particular project discussion would be included or not included, feel free to give me a call or send me an email on that as well. We'll be sharing the draft goals and initiatives with our state community stakeholders directly at this point over the next 2 weeks and getting the feedback from them as well. Make sure that those directions are covering their needs so our community partners are involved and participate. And staff will be putting in those desired outcomes and performance management components that are also tied to the National Citizen Survey responses and measurements as well. We want to make sure that the actual performance measurements are performing as close as possible what we're trying to achieve with the initiatives. So they're held out until we have a pretty good idea of what the initiatives are so we know we're measuring the right thing. With that, we'll return a recommended draft to council at the November council work session, get another feedback, polish the document, and have it ready for adoption at the November council meeting, and then final preparations for the State of the City address. And with that, I'd be happy to take any comments, suggestions, or input from council.
Well, at this point, I would like to just say thank you for taking all of our thoughts and words and of those of us on council at the various meetings and of the residents and putting them into a concise, divided properly document that we can review and provide input back to you.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think as I read this earlier and then scrolling through it now, it is very concise, but there's a lot to it.
It's very concise at 123.
On each point.
But each paragraph, outlines a clear goal that I think the city ought to be endeavored into. Whether it's economic development or housing or you name it, it's all here, and I would certainly encourage any of the residents to dig into it. It's not that complicated, and it's very easy, I think, to go through this and find things that may be of interest to you and provide some feedback to city staff and certainly us on council, so that we can get it into the goals and initiatives, GIOs. So thank you, staff. Well done so far.
Yeah, just want to echo what other council members have said. Thank you for putting this together. I think this puts a really good, it articulates really well what we kind of envisioned for the goals, initiatives, and outcomes. And thank you for making this an inclusive process as well for stakeholders and for citizens as well.
Thank you. I think the important thing for the community to recognize, and Mr. Collins, you've touched on this, but this is our roadmap. This is where the city is going with any sort of effort above and beyond those core services over the next 2 years. It's a long list of items. We will work on them together. We won't get through the entire list. Some we will accomplish pretty quickly. Some we will work through and get them closer to the end of the 2 years. Some will still be in progress at the end of the 2 years, and some probably won't be complete at all. And that could be because priorities changed. There's a limited number of staff to do the work that has to be done, and this is a lot of work. And also the circumstances around the issues that we are dealing with change, and we have to adapt to that. So it's a plan, and it doesn't necessarily guarantee that we'll get everything there, but I can tell you from experience, the vast majority of these things do get done. So it is a real document that guides staff effort, direction, behavior for the next 2 years, and we take it very, very seriously. So it's only going to be as good as the input we get and the input we can provide to staff. So please chime in and let us know. So we have homework to do.
I graduated.
Yeah, you
No,
thought.
you didn't.
You thought.
It's back to school.
Anything else, Mr. Collins?
Thank you.
This takes us to the city attorney report.
Nothing today.
Nothing. Thank you. Unfinished business? New business? This takes us to open forum. If anybody has any issues which they'd like to address council upon, please come forward, state your name and address. We ask that you keep your comments to less than 5 minutes. I do not have any speakers cards, so please come now.
Is there a button I press to start the time?
She takes care of it.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Samuel Steed. I'm a Williamsburg resident at 150A Ucrip Way. I also have the honor of serving as Amnesty International's legislative coordinator for the state of Virginia, and I'm the one who drafted the resolution on Syrian refugees. So I'm aware at first glance it seems like a national issue that the council may not want to touch, but there's a few very important points to be made here. First, we're talking about resettlement, which is inherently a local process. Secondly, this is a non-binding statement of support. The resolution itself doesn't say, okay, we're going to resettle some refugees here in Williamsburg. It's a statement of support in case that happens, and there's really two reasons why we're asking for that statement of support. The first is it's part of a national campaign Amnesty is currently working on called the I Welcome campaign. 16 municipalities, with many more on the way, are currently either considering or in the process of making a resolution similar to the one put forward to you all recently. The most advanced of these processes is currently Burlington, Vermont, whose resolution enjoys broad support both among the populace and in the government and is expected to pass. Here in Virginia, I'm not aware of any other resolutions currently proposed, although Arlington, Virginia, there are a number of people looking to create a similar draft based on the one we're giving to you guys here, as well as other drafts that have been proposed. Local support is very important in the resettlement process, and Amnesty is looking at different cities, whether for symbolic importance, because they've resettled many refugees before, or because of strong Amnesty presence in that city. Williamsburg ticks a few of those boxes, both because of our historical importance, as well as the fact that right here in Williamsburg, we have one of the strongest Amnesty International chapters in the state of Virginia. With 2 years ago, the student group here being awarded the #1 student group in the country award at our national conference. Going forward, there's also the possibility that refugees will be resettled here in Williamsburg. That is not a municipality decision, but rather a state and federal decision. And there's two particular factors that make the idea that we may receive some refugees here in Williamsburg more likely in the next few years. The first is that in the state of Virginia, refugees tend to be resettled in communities with kind of median incomes for the state, as well as that are located in or near towns where we have the local offices of organizations that handle refugee resettlement, whether directly by the Virginia Department of Social Services or whether other organizations that they contract out to, like, for example, Commonwealth Catholic Charities. The local branch of Commonwealth Catholic Charities that handles refugee resettlement in the peninsula is in Newport News, so it's very nearby, and our income category is right in what they look for. Also, the state of Texas, which has traditionally been the United States' largest state to accept refugees, they accept more than anyone else, recently adopted measures to not accept refugees a few months ago that will take an effect a few months down the line. This means that every other state in the United States has a bigger burden going forward, and Virginia is, of course, another major source of refugee resettlement in this country. Between those two factors, it doesn't necessarily mean that there will be Syrian refugees in Williamsburg, but the possibility does exist. Should that come to pass, this resolution helps to both reassure those refugees as well as to build community support on the issue by having this kind of pre-existing measure of support, pre-existing kind of reassurance from the government, because while resettlement of refugees is actually very broadly popular, Syrian refugees in particular have unfortunately been politicized. Also, this is a resolution that enjoys broad support from within our community. We've already received support from the Williamsburg Mosque, multiple groups at the College of William and Mary, the pastor of St. Stephen's Church, and we're currently talking to the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, although they have neither forwarded us a statement of support nor a statement of against support. We're just talking to them about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to address the council? Seeing none, we'll close the open forum. I believe we have some matters for closed session.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we do. I move that we go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711, the Code of Virginia, for the purpose of discussing two property matters per subparagraph 3 regarding acquisition of property for economic development of which discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining or negotiation strategy of a public body, and or the number 2, disposition of economic development property of which discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of a public body. It's a motion.
Do we hear a second?
Second.
Ms. Walton?
Zhang?
Aye.
Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Council will adjourn to closed session.